It was a July afternoon when the life of Diego Martinez, a 29-year-old naval mechanic working in the port of Marbella, was transformed forever. While repairing an engine on an old fishing boat, he saw flames engulf the megalate Esperanza off the coast. On board was Carmen Andalusia's richest heiress, trapped on the sinking yacht while her VIP guests fled in lifeboats. Everyone was thinking only about saving themselves. No one had noticed that she had been left behind. Without hesitating for a second, Diego jumped into the icy waters and swam half a kilometer through the waves, reaching the burning yacht just as it was about to be swallowed by the sea. What happened when he brought her safely to the beach would prove that sometimes fate uses danger to bring together two souls who belong to completely different worlds, but are destined to become one. Diego Martinez had had grease-stained hands for as long as he could remember. By the age of 29, he was considered the best naval mechanic on the entire Costa del Sol, capable of operating any ship with the ease of someone who had inherited the art from his father and grandfather before him. He lived in a small apartment above the workshop in the port of Marbella, where the scent of sea salt mingled with the smell of fuel and paint. That July morning was particularly hot, and the port bustled with luxurious yachts belonging to millionaires, famous actors, and European aristocrats who had come to spend the summer on the pearl of the Andalusian coast. Diego was used to seeing those boats worth more than he would earn in 9 lifetimes, but he wasn't envious. He loved his work, the simplicity of his life, the satisfaction of solving mechanical problems that others considered impossible. While working on the engine of an old fishing boat, he heard screams coming from the sea. He looked up and saw something that froze him. About 500 meters from the coast, the 59-meter-long megagate Esperanza was engulfed in flames. It was one of the most luxurious yachts in the Mediterranean. Valued at more than 49 million euros, the flames rose into the sky, creating a column of black smoke visible for miles. From the port, lifeboats could be seen moving away rapidly, loaded with panicked guests. The Coast Guard had already been alerted, but Diego knew it would take at least 20 minutes to arrive. What no one had noticed was that one of the lifeboats had become empty and someone was still on board the burning yacht. Carmen Andalusia was 27 years old and the last descendant of one of the oldest and richest families in Spain. At the age of 21, he had inherited an empire that included shipyards, luxury hotels, and real estate investments around the world. His personal fortune exceeded 200 million euros, but behind that wealth lay a profound loneliness. This afternoon he had organized an exclusive party on his yacht for some friends from Madrid's high society. He had retired to his cabin for a work call when the fire broke out in the engine room. The panic was immediate. The guests rushed to the lifeboats, driven by survival instinct, completely forgetting about the hostess. Carmen was trapped when a burning beam collapsed in front of the door, blocking her inside. Water had begun to enter through the damaged hull, and for the first time in her privileged life, she found herself facing death, with her money unable to save her. Diego didn't think twice. He put down his tools, took off his t-shirt and jeans, and launched himself off the dock with the power of an Olympic swimmer. The water was freezing even though it was July, and the current was strong, but he had been swimming in water since he was a child, and he knew every current, every hidden rock. He swam half a kilometer with a determination he didn't know he had, driven by a force that went beyond rationality. By the time he reached the yacht, the flames were so intense that the heat burned his skin even from a distance. The structure had begun to lean dangerously, a sign that it was rapidly taking on water. He climbed aboard using a rope hanging from the deck, ignoring the pain of the superficial burns. The smoke was so thick that breathing was almost impossible. He covered his face with a piece of wet cloth and began to walk around the cabins, shouting to make himself heard. It was then that he heard a faint voice coming from one of the main cabins. Carmen was sitting in a corner with a handkerchief over her mouth to protect herself from the smoke. When she saw that unknown man appear in her cabin like a saving angel, she thought she was dreaming. Tall, athletic, with blue eyes that contrasted with his dark, wet hair, but above all there was a determination in his gaze that immediately gave her confidence. Without saying a word, Diego quickly assessed the situation. The burning beam was too heavy to move, and the ground was beginning to give way. The only exit was through the porthole of the cabin. He took Carmen in his arms with the ease of someone accustomed to lifting weights, and led her to the porthole. She was lighter than he expected, but he felt her heart beating hard against his chest. For a moment, their eyes met, and Diego saw, in that look, a vulnerability he hadn't expected to find in such a rich and powerful woman. The leap was desperate. Diego held Carmen close as they jumped into the sea from the porthole, just as another explosion rocked the yacht. The water greeted them like an icy embrace, and Diego began to swim toward the shore, holding Carmen with one arm during one of the most difficult swims of his life. By the time they reached Marbella Beach, they were both exhausted and covered in soot. Diego gently placed Carmen on the sand, and she looked at him with eyes she had never had for any man. It wasn't gratitude I felt, it was something deeper and unexpected. Behind them, the yacht Esperanza slowly sank in flames, taking 49 million euros with it. But at that moment on the beach in Marbella, two people from different worlds were looking into each other's eyes for the first time, and neither of them knew their lives would never be the same again. Marbella Beach quickly filled with curious journalists and members of high society who had recognized Carmen Angeles. The sirens of ambulances and Coast Guard vehicles broke the silence of the summer afternoon as impromptu photographers tried to capture the rescue scene. Carmen was sitting on the sand, wrapped in a thermal blanket, but her eyes never left Diego. He was talking to the civil guard, simply recounting what had happened, as if saving people from burning yachts was part of his daily routine. I wasn't looking for attention. He didn't want to be interviewed by the journalists who were starting to arrive. When a paramedic approached, Carmen refused to go to the hospital. He only had a few scratches, and the smoke he had inhaled had irritated his throat, but he was physically fine. Emotionally, however, I was experiencing something I had never experienced before. That man had saved her by risking his own life, without knowing who he was, without expecting anything in return. Diego approached when the rescuers finished their checks. Carmen looked at him from below, noticing for the first time the details of his face. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow, probably the result of a work accident, and the strong, calloused hands of someone who works with tools. He was completely different from the men of his world. Bankers in suits and ties, businessmen always perfectly dressed, aristocrats who had never worked a day in their lives. The conversation was brief, but meaningful. Diego simply asked how she felt with genuine concern. Carmen was surprised by the simplicity of the question. She was used to people speaking to her with excessive deference or hidden interest. He looked at her simply as a human being who had lived through a traumatic experience. They introduced themselves naturally. Diego Martinez, port mechanic, Carmen Andalusian. No further explanation necessary. When their hands touched, she felt an electric shock she had never felt before, not even with the most fascinating men she had ever met. A small group of elegant people came running up. They were the yacht's guests who had fled in the lifeboats. Their relief at seeing Carmen alive was evident, but Diego noticed that none of them apologized for forgetting her during the evacuation. They seemed more concerned with how they would appear on camera than with their well-being. While her friends made scenes of belated concern, Carmen approached Diego, who was about to leave. I didn't know how to thank him for what he had done, but he shrugged modestly. He had done what anyone would have done, he said, although they both knew it wasn't true. When Carmen suggested they have dinner together to thank him, Diego hesitated. He wasn't the fancy restaurant type, he admitted honestly. But Carmen smiled with a spontaneity that surprised her. Who said it had to be elegant? Did you know of any place that made good fish? That night, instead of dining at one of Marbella's star-rated restaurants, as she usually did, Carmen found herself sitting on a rustic terrace overlooking the sea, in a small beach bar that Diego had frequented for years. The owner Paco was an old fisherman who prepared the freshest fish on the coast using traditional recipes passed down through generations. Carmen had traded her designer clothes for a simple dress purchased at a local store, but it was still impossible not to notice her natural elegance. Diego, who had put on a clean shirt and dark pants, felt uncomfortable at first, but Carmen's simplicity quickly put him at ease. During dinner they talked about everything and nothing. Diego told him about his passion for engines, how he had learned the trade from his father, and how much he loved the sea and the quiet life of Marbella. For the first time in years, Carmen found herself talking about herself without filters, about the loneliness she felt despite always being surrounded by people, about the pressure of managing an inherited empire, about how she often felt like a fish out of water in her gilded world. When the night ended, they both knew something special had happened. Diego accompanied Carmen to the small hotel where she had decided to stay that night instead of returning immediately to Madrid. They stopped in front of the entrance, neither of them wanting that moment to end. Carmen was grateful for the night, describing it as different from anything she had experienced. When they said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek, they both felt that this would not be the last time they would see each other. Neither of them slept much that night, both thinking back on a dinner that had changed the course of their lives. In the following days, Carmen was unable to return to Madrid as she had planned. Officially, she had to take care of the insurance paperwork for the sunken yacht, but in reality, she didn't want to leave Diego's side. Every day, I found an excuse to stop by the port. Carmen had begun to dress more and more simply. Jeans, t-shirts, sneakers. She seemed more relaxed, more herself. Diego looked forward to those daily visits, seeing behind the wealth and famous name an intelligent, sensitive, and incredibly lonely woman. On the third day, Carmen asked if she could watch him work. She sat on a wooden box and watched him disassemble an outboard motor, asking pointed questions that demonstrated a sharp mind. The conversation revealed a lot about both of them. Diego talked about his passion for engines, which he inherited from his father. Carmen from the pressure of managing an empire when she was only 21 years old. That was the moment when they both understood that they were doing something that went beyond physical attraction or gratitude. There was a deep connection. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, we continue with the video. A mutual recognition of souls that completed each other. On the fourth day, Carmen wanted Diego to teach her how to drive a boat. I had never learned because there were always professional captains. That morning they took their small boat and went out to sea. Carmen's delicate hands rested on Diego's calloused ones at the helm, while he taught her to feel the sea, to read the wind. It was during that lesson that they kissed for the first time. Carmen had just made a perfect turn and was euphoric. She turned to Diego with her eyes shining with joy, and he kissed her sweetly, tasting the salt on her lips. When they parted, they both knew they had passed the point of no return. They were two people who had found in each other something they didn't know they were looking for, but they also knew the outside world wouldn't understand. The press, Carmen's friends, everyone would have something to say about this impossible relationship. And soon they would have to decide if their love was strong enough to withstand the approaching storms. The news exploded in the newspapers after a week. Headlines in large print told of the impossible love between the heiress and the mechanic. The photos of Carmen and Diego holding hands went around the world. The world of high society was in turmoil. Carmen woke up to the phone ringing incessantly. The board of directors of Andala's Holdings had organized an emergency meeting. The lawyers were concerned about the company's image. Some shareholders expressed bewilderment about the direction their chairwoman was taking. Diego was not prepared for this kind of attention. Photographers stationed outside his workshop, journalists with microphones, curious customers who came not to repair boats, but to see the guy with the Andalusian woman. His simple world had been invaded by a reality he didn't recognize. That night they met at their beach bar, but even there the curious watched them. Carmen apologized for what was happening. His board wanted him to return to Madrid and clarify the situation, arguing that the relationship was damaging to the company. It was Diego who proposed a brave solution. If they really loved each other, they had to find a way to make things work. Maybe it was time for him to step out of his comfort zone, just as she had stepped out of hers, learning how to steer the ship. Carmen suggested that Diego come to Madrid to work in her company's shipyards. He had a yacht division where he could contribute his unique experience. It was a commitment that required sacrifices from both of them, but for the first time they saw a possible future together. 2 weeks later, Diego entered the offices of Andalus Holdings. When he started talking about engines, hulls, and marine technologies, everyone realized that behind the simple appearance lay extraordinary competence. Carmen watched him speak with pride. He had agreed to adapt to their world without losing authenticity. That night they toasted to their future together. They had chosen love against the social conventions and prejudices of the world. 6 months later, Diego had transformed the yacht division of Andalusian Holdings. His practical experience, combined with the technology and funds available within the company, had led to innovations that were revolutionizing the sector. Wealthy clients appreciated being able to speak directly with someone who really understood their boats, not just spreadsheets. Carmen had learned to divide her time between Madrid and Marbella. Every Friday night she took her Maserati and drove to the coast, where Diego was waiting for her at the house they had bought together. A modest but elegant villa overlooking the sea, where they could simply be themselves, away from the spotlight. The press had gradually lost interest in their story, but what at first seemed like a whim of a wealthy heiress had turned out to be a solid and lasting relationship. Diego had proven not to be a gold digger, and Carmen had proven not to be going through a temporary, rebellious phase. The true test of their union came during a gala dinner to raise funds for cancer research organized by the Andalusian Foundation. It was one of the most exclusive events of the year, with international guests, politicians, businessmen, and celebrities. Carmen had insisted that Diego accompany her as her official partner. Diego felt uncomfortable in a tuxedo, surrounded by people talking about multi-million-dollar investments and international politics. But Carmen never left him alone, introducing him to everyone with obvious pride. During the night, a group of Madrid businessmen began making disparaging comments about Diego, thinking he wasn't listening. They talked about fishermen who put on airs, about how Carmen had lost her head over the first one who had made her heart beat. Diego listened in silence, feeling the anger grow, not for him, but for Carmen. She couldn't stand being judged for her choice of love. When one of them suggested that maybe she needed to come back to reality, Diego approached the group with the calmness of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. Without raising his voice, but with absolute firmness, he defended Carmen and their relationship. He explained that Carmen Andaluz was the most intelligent, brave, and generous person he knew, and that the fact that she had chosen him made her only braver than them. The silence that followed was eloquent. Carmen had witnessed the scene from afar and approached Diego with her eyes shining with admiration and love. That night, returning home, Carmen made a decision she had been brewing for months. She wanted to marry Diego, not to silence gossip or improve her public image, but because she couldn't imagine her life without him. She surprised Diego by proposing marriage to him, explaining that there was no room for traditional conventions in their relationship. Diego accepted with emotion, and months later they married in Marbella, in the same church where Diego's parents had been married. The wedding was a simple but elegant ceremony overlooking the sea that had served as the setting for their meeting. The guests were an incredible mix. Fishermen from the port alongside business magnates, naval mechanics alongside international diplomats. During the reception, Paco made a toast that moved all the guests, speaking of a love that doesn't look at the wallet, but at the heart, that doesn't ask where you come from, but where you want to go together. That night, in their ocean view bridal suite in Marbella, Carmen and Diego fell asleep in each other's arms, knowing that their love had endured every trial. From the dramatic yacht rescue to societal pressures, from class differences to the world's prejudices, and that they had remained united and grown stronger together. 2 years after the wedding, Carmen and Diego had found their perfect balance. Andaluz Holdings has never worked better. Diego's yacht division had tripled profits, and his hands-on experience had brought innovations that were revolutionizing the luxury nautical sector. Carmen had learned to delegate more, trusting her team and focusing on strategic decisions rather than operational details. This gave him more time for his private life, for weekends in Marbella, for trips together, discovering ports and marinas around the world. His house in Marbella had become a perfect refuge. Diego had built with his own hands a small private dock where they had a restored fishing boat together. Carmen had learned to cook fish following Paco's recipes, and his dinners on the terrace at sunset had become a sacred ritual. The biggest surprise came one spring morning. Carmen woke up feeling strange, with nausea that she initially attributed to something she had eaten. When the symptoms persisted, Diego convinced her to go to the doctor. The positive pregnancy test left them both speechless. Sitting in the doctor's office, they looked into each other's eyes with a mixture of joy, surprise, and infinite tenderness. Carmen was 30 years old and had never seriously thought about motherhood, too busy running the business. Diego was 33 years old and had a secret desire for a family he had never dared to express. The 9 months that followed were the most beautiful of their lives. Carmen slowed down her work pace, delegating even more and concentrating on the pregnancy. Diego became the most loving dad-to-be in the world, transforming a room in his Marbella villa into the most beautiful nursery on the coast. During the 7th month, Carmen organized a garden party to officially announce the pregnancy to all her friends and colleagues. It was an occasion to celebrate not only the arrival of the baby, but also their love that had overcome all difficulties. The guests were the same incredible mix of their wedding, Carmen's golden world and Diego's simple but genuine world. During the party, Carmen recounted how true love had found her in the most unexpected way through a dramatic rescue that had forever changed her life. He explained that Diego had taught him that true wealth is not in bank accounts, but in human relationships, that happiness cannot be bought, but is built day by day with the people you love. When little Esperanza was born, named after their first meeting in Marbella, Carmen and Diego knew their love had created something perfect. The girl had her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair, but above all she had inherited both of their determinations. In the years that followed, Esperanza grew up surrounded by the love of 2 parents who taught her values that went beyond money. He learned to swim in the waters of Marbella with his father Diego and to run his first small businesses selling shells to tourists under the supervision of his mother Carmen. The Martinez Andala's family became an example to everyone of how love can overcome any barrier. Carmen had never given up her position in business, but had learned to balance success and personal happiness. Diego had become one of the most respected innovators in the nautical industry, but he had never forgotten his roots. On the evening of the 5th anniversary of their first meeting, Carmen and Diego sat on the beach in Marbella, where it all began. Esperanza slept in the chalet, and the 2 of them looked at the sea illuminated by the full moon. Carmen thought that yacht was bound to burn, that it was destiny. Diego had to save her not only from the flames, but from the empty life she was living. Diego reflected that she had to teach him that love doesn't look at your bank account, but at the courage you have in your heart. At that moment, from the chalet, came the voice of hope calling them. They turned around and saw their 3-year-old daughter leaning out the window in her pajamas and holding the teddy bear under her arm. They both laughed and ran to look for her. Esperanza settled between them on the sand, and together they looked at the starry sky above Marbella. The girl asked Dad to tell her again about when he had saved Mom from the sea, and Diego began to tell, for the umpteenth time, the story of how a poor mechanic and a rich princess had fallen in love thanks to a fire, a brave rescue, and the magic of true love that overcomes all differences. Because, in the end, the only thing that really matters is having someone who loves you for who you are, someone you'd be willing to throw yourself into the flames for, someone with whom you can build a family based on love and not on appearances. And the 3 of them had found him on the beach in Marbella on a July night that had forever changed the meaning of the word family. Like it. If you think true love knows no social differences, tell us what moment in the story moved you the most. Share to inspire those who believe in everyday heroes. Subscribe for more stories of love that transcends all barriers. Sometimes it takes a fire to ignite true love. Sometimes the hero you're looking for is wearing overalls, not a designer suit. And sometimes the most beautiful family is born from a rescue that saves 2 hearts together. Because true wealth is not measured in euros, but in courageous gestures and hearts that beat in unison. Oh,